Hi, everyone. Welcome to Key Takeaways. I'm Chuck Murphy, and today I'm joined by Sarah Marion. And we are going to talk a little bit about generational differences in fitness engagement. And Sarah presented at a conference last week to a bunch of fitness professionals and about how different generations approach fitness differently. And one of the generations that really sticks out is Gen X, and they have lower engagement with working out and gym memberships and that sort of thing. And we started talking about whether or not this was kind of a life stage thing that might abate in a couple of years, or is it a generational thing that we expect to stick with them for the next 10 to 20 years. I thought it was an interesting discussion. We felt it was worth recording a podcast on, and Sarah's always a delight to listen to because she's so knowledgeable and so good at all things fitness and wellness. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I will talk to you soon. Hi, everyone, and mostly hi to Sarah. Super
Hello.
excited to talk this morning. Sarah's fresh off a pretty long vacation, so I'm sure you're going to be extra insightful today. I am about to go on vacation, so I'm going to be extra dreary today, maybe.
We'll balance each other out.
I'm going to set the expectations low for this. But so Sarah and I were talking last week as we're going through, as her and her team are going through reporting for Q2's State of Our Health report. We were talking a little bit about generational differences. Sarah presented at a conference here in LA last week, so we got to see each other in person, which is pretty exciting. But and in talking about those generational differences, Sarah showed some data that shows that Gen X is working out a little less and going to the gym less than other generations, and we got into this discussion of whether that is a life stage thing or a true generational difference. And we thought it would make for a great podcast. So that's what we're going to discuss this morning. So good morning, Sarah. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
We haven't recorded one of these in a while. It's been at least a month.
I know. I'm excited.
I know. I'm super excited. This will be fun. And I always love talking about the state of our health data, and especially when we get to Gen X, which is, my age group.
Right. So you're representing your group here.
I'll represent the Gen Xers, which are sadly becoming like among the older cohorts now. Like, I used to always think of Gen X as like, younger to middle. now we're solidly getting lumped together with the boomers.
Yeah.
You millennials and then the Gen Zs are getting lumped together. I'm in the older category, but it's okay. It's okay. It happens to the best of us. So maybe a good place to start is we can rewind, since this discussion between us started last week, but let's rewind back to what some of the data points you were discussing last week and how this conversation started.
Yeah. So I just presented at, it's called Idea World. It's a big convention for personal trainers and fitness instructors. And I presented on generational fitness journey. So how each generation approaches fitness and, how you can use that knowledge to better serve your current customers and also, attract new ones. And Gen X is always kind of an interesting case in our data set because by the numbers, they're just kind of in between millennials and boomers. But that hides a lot of, I think, nuances and also difficulties if you're in the fitness industry around marketing to Gen X, because Gen X are actually, at this age, it's precisely when people drop their gym memberships. And I think we should, so Gen X technically right now is ages 43 to 58. So just smack dab in middle age. And you might say, yep, does that resonate? I don't know.
I'm very clearly a Gen Xer. I'm like smack in the middle of the range. Like I know you're a little more of a tweener, but I am smack dab in the middle of that range.
Yeah, and this is a time
I'm going to represent Gen X really well today, Sarah. Even though I've got a vacation coming up, I'm going to give all my energy.
Good, perfect. So Gen X, like this is not a hard time of life necessarily, but it's a time when there's a lot of, I think, physical transitions, right? You're shifting, your your body is changing. And I think that's part of the struggle that Gen X probably has with fitness, is that you can't do the things that you used to be able to do. And that makes fitness less fun. It makes it kind of harder to want to do. But there's some other things going on too that I think that we can dig in, because I think there's a generational approach to fitness that is driving Gen X away from the gym specifically. So Gen X has some of the lowest numbers of gym membership. So just to give you an example, for ages 35 to 44, which is the elder millennials and the little bit of the beginning of Gen X. So 43% of them have a gym membership. I should say 43% of those who are fitness engaged have a gym membership. And that drops down to 27% for the next decade up, 45 to 54. And then it drops even further if your age is 55 to 64 to 21%. And then after retirement age, it starts going back up again. Yeah. So the boomers are actually more likely to have gym memberships than Gen X does.
That's so interesting. Not to put you on the spot, I should know better than to ask questions like this in the podcast, but I didn't think of it till you said it just now. Is the fitness engagement lower for Gen X than it is for boomers?
Good question. I can check that. I think it's actually about the same.
You think it's about the same?
Yeah. Makes sense. And part of that is because we define exercise and physical activity pretty openly. So you don't have to necessarily be
it's the shift to Yeah. And it's funny. I think it's, I also, while you look that up, I'm going to step back and talk like an analyst for a sec. But I think there's like a number of different things that make this hard to untangle, right? Because clearly you have life stage things, which means, that is this something that did the boomers already also go through this at the same age and then recover back, right? That would be more of a life stage thing. We don't have data going back far enough to definitively answer that question. And as far as we know, nobody does, or at least we haven't been able to find it. But then you have generational differences, right? So maybe this is just something that has, that causes Gen X to deal with this particular life stage different than previous generations or upcoming generations. Yeah. And then you have, a third category of is this somehow a macro kind of interaction where hey, Gen X dealt with COVID differently than other generations did, which is not really so much life stage or generation, but more so in interaction, to sound like a dork. But it does raise a really interesting question, because I do think that Gen X has always been attitudinally very different. And we've talked a lot about in other scenarios about how, there's definitely aspects of some of the younger generations that feel more like boomers than they do like Gen X. Gen X has always been a little bit of a generation. But I do think that it's also a particularly difficult life stage. And maybe we just have, first of all, we have a lot more decisions to make at this life stage than previous generations did, right? We didn't, and it was a little more clear. I also too think that I'd be curious to know if you agree with this. By the way, did you find the data?
I did. So Gen X has the lowest fitness engagement by 1 percentage point. But in terms of
all delta, but it's a delta. All right.
Yeah, the number who exercise weekly or do any kind of physical activity, which people can define as, gardening or chasing after children. We have data on that. The boomers are higher than Gen X. So are millennials.
Huh. That's interesting. So Sarah and I have already talked about this, full disclosure, but I'm going to go backwards and pretend we never have. And the first question I asked last week when we were talking about this before your presentation was, do you think this is generational life stage? And I think it's interesting to document your answer to
that. Yeah, I think as a short answer, I think that a big chunk of it is generational. I do believe that life stage plays a part. I think these are two things that are related. But generationally, I do think that as millennials move into middle age, more of them will keep their gym memberships than Gen X has. So by the time millennials are in this 40s, early 50s life stage, I think more of them will have gym memberships. And that's because for millennials, we see kind of throughout our data, and when you speak to them, wellness plays a much bigger role in their lives, and more of them organize their lives around wellness, speaking broadly. So, and fitness is a big part of that. So millennials spend the most on fitness of any generation. They more of them do more activities than other generations. They exercise across different spaces more than other generations, including young adults. So they approach fitness from a different perspective. It's part of self care. It's part of me time. So it plays a larger role in their lives. Whereas for Gen X, attitudinally, they're a little bit more like boomers in that fitness is important, but it's a lot like eating your vegetables. It's just something that you need to do, on a pretty regular basis to take care of yourself, but it's not the organizing principle of your life, right? And I think that is, so that's the generational difference. So there's a very clear, different approach to fitness because fitness plays a different role in how you feel good about your whole life.
Yeah, there's a certain discipline to it that millennials and also I think Gen Z. I don't know if you disagree with that.
Gen Z are much like millennials. Yeah, they're just young.
They kind of there's a discipline and an engagement to it that is different than Gen X has.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And with boomers, I don't know if you agree with this, but there is still the discipline because they tend to be more disciplined about a lot of things. But there's also just a very clear social component that's much more of a routine, right? It's this is what people do to get together, right? They play now it's pickleball, but or they walk together, or they golf together, or they whatever it is they're doing. It's framed in a little bit more of a social routine.
Yes,
which I do think that's something I kind of wanted to talk about. And I when we talked about this briefly last week, I thought about it and I was like, I'm going to save this for the podcast. But I think the social part of this is a big dynamic. And I'm totally riffing here because I don't necessarily have the right data to make this argument. But there's always been something a little bit funny about Gen X in terms of, the social side of things. And I do think when you hit, there's unquestionably when you get close to 50, the recovery, all of this stuff does become hard enough. It takes more discipline. It takes more motivation, not so much to do the thing you used to do, but to be okay the next day. Right. It's exactly. I definitely notice in my own body is like, I can still go do things I could do 10 years ago, but I really pay for it a lot more, which is where my routines get off if I do like a particularly hard workout one day. And I'm someone that's always been I'm pretty disciplined. I work out for at least an hour every day. Like I always have. And I see it more as like a mental thing, but I definitely notice as I get older, it can really wreak havoc with like, I did this hike and now, my ankle hurts or this hurts. And then I'm more likely to somehow make an excuse or downshift what should have been the next day's routine. And that becomes a little bit of a fight that I've never had before in my life, really. Like, there's just a difference in terms of, like when you're younger, you might be sore from working out, but it's a different kind of sore. It's not really in the way. It's there, you feel it, but it's not to the level that you're like, I'm not sure I could do this next workout the next day. Whereas like now that I'm 50, like I'm more likely to get things that it's like, it's not quite soreness. It's more like, did I do something serious here? Or like, it's hard to recover from. And so you have to have a lot more discipline to kind of fight around that, I think.
I think so too. And knowledge. And you're a person who has been fit and doing this for a long time. Like imagine if you're just coming back to it after a period where you've been raising kids and building a career. And now, whoops, I am, 30 pounds overweight. I need to get back on the ball. And you can't play basketball. It hurts to even walk. And you don't know, like, is the hurt something that's going to go away? Do I need to wait? All of those things become much more difficult to deal with. And I think that's that is a life stage thing that happens to everybody at around this age. But it's just another factor kind of keeping Gen X from fitness and from kind of getting back on the horse if they were ever off of it.
There's a lot of different ways we could talk about this. And one of the things I've been thinking about that is interesting to me about Gen X is Gen X has always been like, if you go back to this, like how this Gen X discussion started with like the latchkey kids and the overly dependent on TV kind of kids, or
Mm-hmm.
there's different descriptions of this, but they've been a little bit more isolationist, if I could use that word, than other generations. And I think it's interesting when you hit this age, it's harder to do social type things, social workouts, right? Like and so I wonder if that might be the thing if that's related to them. We might see them split from boomers in a way because they're not as good as a group here. Obviously, we're talking about it as a group, um, at maintaining like social routines and social connections. Um, clearly, they're not as good at it as boomers were. Right? Boomers are they're very focused on that, and they're very. I would say you have to give them a lot of credit for having these like strategies for keeping up social routines. Like it is very routiny the
Mm-hmm.
way boomers approach social, and then and I think in retirement a lot of the you have flat out socialization like lunch, but I think you also have like a lot of a mix. Like there's going to be four women they're going to go on a walk in the morning, or there's going to be like four guys that have like a standing tennis appointment or whatever it is, right? Gen X struggles with that kind of stuff a little bit. They are a little bit more. I don't know if the word the word conflicted about how to go about stuff like this is. They're just not. They make things more complex than they need to be sometimes.
I think,
Um,
yeah, that's definitely true. So on either side of Gen X, you have boomers who value, they're socially engaged in a way that Gen X isn't. And then millennials are looking for community and social engagement from fitness too. That's the millennials, they like tribes and experiences and blah, blah, blah.
yeah.
But Gen X falls in the middle, and a lot of that is, I think, this generational shtick of like, oh, we don't need anybody, we take care of ourselves.
Yeah,
We
the
can
independent. Yeah, the
mm-hmm,
independent
yeah,
is going to hurt you with stuff like
and they
this, right?
really care about self sufficiency and independence, and that factors into a lot of it filters down into a lot of barriers. And so one is, I think, exactly what you say. I don't think Gen X needs community any less than any other generation, but they don't think that they do. And so they don't go searching for it. And that
Yeah,
becomes when people have community and build community around fitness routines, that keeps them doing them. But if you don't think that you need that, and if you're not looking for it, then you're going to miss out on that factor, right? Uh, Similarly, and I think it's related, younger people and older folks too, but much less than younger people, are much more explicitly looking for fun in their workouts. And that drops at this age also. So fitness becomes less fun. And part of that is, I think, the generational idea about what fitness means and the role it plays in your life. So it becomes much more something that, oh, this is just a chore I have to check off. I have to go for a walk today. And whether it's fun or not is like, doesn't factor in as explicitly to the equation around whether you're going to do it and how valuable it is to you. Um, I heard one of the people that came to my talk at this fitness instructor convention said that her Gen X clients, uh, different from boomers and millennials, they bring a cynicism with them that I think comes from
yeah,
this generational place of, I'm not sure if what, like, are you trying to scam me? I want to take care of myself. Like there's is a guardedness that prevents them sometimes from trying new things
yeah.
that exists much less among older and younger groups.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. It's to me like the psychologist in me is like it's an insecurity. It's a very clear insecurity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's funny because we talked a lot about boomers before, right? Like they will tell you like it's funny. We're always asking people questions about this stuff, right? But if you talk to like a boomer and you're like, hey, why are you in this weekly tennis group? And they'll be like, because those are my friends, and I'm there to see my friends. If it wasn't tennis, it could be mahjong, it could
Right.
be
Something
bocce. It
else.
doesn't matter, right? It's very clear that this is a way to stay socially connected, and they have
Yeah.
no insecurity about telling you that. And if you talk to like a millennial or Gen Z's the same way, they are choosing, as you mentioned the word tribe earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm super into yoga, and I go 4 days a week because yoga is really good for your body. And those are my friends because they're also super into yoga. So they
Mm-hmm.
actually think that's totally fine. So do I. But it's a very clear difference in how they think about it. Gen X in between has this weird, to me, it always feels like anxiety or insecurity. Like oftentimes people that are isolationist, it stems from anxiety first, right? Like but they are not as comfortable clearly saying, I need a social circle.
Right.
And they're also like a little bit pessimistic of the whole tribe thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
so they end up in this weird little bubble, which is why, I mean, you mentioned earlier, I don't think we've talked about this in the podcast earlier, but one of the ways this conversation came up last week when we were talking about it is kind of the rise of walking, right? Like, so they end up in this weird, I might say there's nothing wrong with walking, but from an external thing, it doesn't seem as, it's certainly not as social, like it doesn't appear that they're doing it as a group that often. But it leaves them in this weird place where they struggle a little bit to define what they need or want, right? Like the younger generations define it in terms of my body needs to stay active.
Right.
The older generations like define it more as like I need a social circle, a community. And I don't know, it's interesting with Gen X, and it's something that like I don't see, if I just had to make a guess on this, if they haven't sort of resolved how to do this by now, I don't know that they are going to become better at it in the next 10 years, right? I think this might, I mean, I'm essentially saying the same thing you said when you said it's mostly generational. It's not necessarily a life stage.
Yeah, I agree. They're a really hard nut to crack. So walking rises anyway walking is always the number one exercise for across all age groups, but the percentage who walk weekly goes up with age. And then the second most popular activity gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And what that means is just most people are walking as their primary form of exercise, which is great. Like that is what people should do from a public health standpoint. That's excellent. And walking also like solves all of these barriers that many people have, but that rise with middle age, which is lack of time. So I need something that I can fit into my schedule, that I can do by myself. The older you get, how much you pay becomes a bigger barrier. So millennials are willing to pay to get what they want. Boomers don't like to pay, but they do like to be with other people. And they like a customer-centric experience. They want to chat with people. So they'll go to a place like where they can get that. And so Gen X, though, is stuck in the middle. They have this practical approach to value that boomers have, where they don't want to have to pay more than they need to, but they're also not willing to pay for any of that special stuff either. And so again, that turns into, well, I'll just buy some shoes and I'll go for a walk every day. And walking is really great and very like easy to do on a regular basis, but I think also it doesn't scratch the itch for everybody, right?
Yeah, and it definitely is less social. And it'll be interesting to see, like, I just wonder if this is like a little bit of a signal that Gen X is also going to be very different in retirement. Because I do think the boomers have really, it's funny, they catch a lot of heat these days, especially on social media. I mean, people love to hate on the boomers, but they really are an unusual generation in a lot of ways. And their retirement is very unusual. And this has gotten a lot of press lately, but have you seen some of these studies that they're clearly socializing more in retirement than previous generations? They're drinking more. They're having way more sex than previous generations. I think all that is really
time.
They're kind of partying, right? And so I don't think that Gen X I don't think this is the new retirement. I think that Gen X is going to get there and they're going to be different, right? I think that this party ends with the boomers a little bit. Now, I do think maybe the millennials are closer to the boomers and bring some of that stuff back later, but I don't know. Yeah. It's a fascinating discussion to me.
It's a really great question. I think so. Boomers' parents. So I think that they're replicating a lot of the things they saw their parents do. Very engaged. This is the whole bowling alone thing, right? That's talking about Gen X. Boomers are very socially engaged, and their parents are very socially engaged. They're active in organizations. They set up tennis clubs. They, join these retirement communities and then join all the clubs to see who they like and meet people. Um, and I think you're completely right. I have no idea what Gen X is going to look like in retirement. I hope it's not like this kind of sad picture that we've painted so far. Maybe they'll finally come around. Maybe they're saving all of their goals for retirement,
It's
but yeah.
You hinted at this a few times earlier, but I don't think we flat out discussed it. And again, I'm not going to try to put you on the spot, but so it makes from a marketing or business perspective, it makes Gen X harder to crack, right? Did you have it? Was there some sort of consensus as to how some people were successfully marketing to them? Like, is it kind of a functional kind of argument? Is it more like a fun kind of like? Was there any insights into that? And I know that's a super hard question, so it's totally fine if you're not sure.
Well, I think that so I talk to a lot of like fitness professionals, right? And in every generation, there is a group of people who are really into fitness, and that's who they know. And so sometimes when I tell this story about Gen X, which is based on general population data, right? They're like, "Oh, well, that's not my customers." So a lady came up to me, a fitness instructor, and said she has a ton of Gen X, and they are all playing pickleball, and they love it.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, are they also in a gym? Yeah. So it's this little cohort that is always there, that is very active and likes fitness. But the problem is that the other side of that equation is so big
Yeah.
for Gen X.
And you
So
don't
yeah, it's very difficult to talk to them because they don't want to pay anything. They're afraid that you're, selling them something they don't need. They want to do it themselves. So I do think that there is kind of a dearth of fitness programming for this age group. So like people in their 40s and 50s, a lot of stuff for young people, right? There's stuff for boomers and seniors too, but there's not a lot of midlife specific programming. When clearly like this age group needs some help in figuring out how to get exercise that feels good, that they can come back and do the next day, that's going to like meet their physical needs that they have now. But I think that's hard still to sell to Gen X because
it is because
they're not sure that they want that, and they also want to do it themselves.
Yeah, they've got that independence mindset, and that's the thing that's interesting. Is you hinted this, but just the ones that the gyms or the fitness programs are seeing are really enjoying it because it is good for them, right? So that some of the ones that have more of the isolationist tendencies, it's not like that is the correct instinct they have, right? It's a little bit malfunctioning.
Yeah.
Or maladaptive is a better word. But if it is good for them, it's just about how, and once they engage, they realize that, right? Once they do it, they're like, oh, this is, but the ones that aren't engaging, that are still a little bit, stuck at home, those poor little latchkey kids. It's harder to convince them of like why this is good for you, and set it up in a way that they're comfortable with, because they're not the benefit of the socialization or the benefit of the wellness. They're skeptical of both. So you have to kind of like, I don't know. We got to get like, Christian Slater out of retirement, have him explain how fitness has changed his life or something.
Right? There's a whole bunch of them. Maybe Keanu Reeves can come do it. Yeah, because I think, when we interview people in this age group, we're talking to people who are quite engaged, but even the folks that regularly exercise, that care about it a lot, they're doing it in a different way. It's has to be something that they do by themselves. Or this is the group also where frequently there is a person who's like, well, I try these workout videos on YouTube, but because they're not really sure what they're looking for, and they like those workout videos aren't always good for them, it's really hard to like develop a consistent practice around working out at home for a lot of people. Or I do 30 minutes on the elliptical every other day, and that's it. That's all that I do. That's all I need.
And it's framed in their minds as a chore, right? It's like that's a hard thing to overcome. It's like the old cognitive dissonance studies, right? It's the same task. with two different framings, one person doesn't mind it and the other does mind
Yep.
it. And it's
Yep.
like, and that's a little bit of how this has happened is they have a lot of things. And it's interesting because they've always been a little bit like this with work too. Like work is a chore and you just have to do it.
Yep.
And that's why they get so frustrated with the younger generations that are like, work should be fun. And it's like,
Right.
it's interesting. It's interesting to watch it play out. But obviously like this, it's so critical in these later years to
Yeah.
embrace it, right? Like I would make the argument that the older you get, the more critical these kind of habits and routines are.
For sure, which is why it's kind of it, it's kind of a crisis. Like, here is this generation that really needs fitness. They need it right now if they want to have the great years that these boomers are having. And how to get it to them. Like, what are the emotional hooks that really work for Gen X, I think is really a struggle. I spoke to a group of YMCA operators, and one of them asked a question, which was, how do I get the Gen X parents? They drop their kids off, their teenagers work out, and they just leave.
Yeah.
Because I was talking about how these two generations are related, right? So Gen Z are the children of Gen X.
Yeah.
And Gen Z have a much different approach to fitness, and yet their parents are the ones that just like, go to the gym, go have fun, it'll be great. I'm gonna go home. And I didn't have a good answer. They're choosing every day not to go to the gym actively.
Yeah, it's really wild. Like it's really wild. Like it's a tricky little puzzle to solve because they reject a lot of the clearest benefits, or I shouldn't say they reject. They're skeptical. Many of them are skeptical.
They're skeptical. Now, I do think that one thing that happens at this age is that you start to have people have heart attacks, and so these big come to Jesus moments happen, either to yourself or to someone you know, and then that is a big trigger that will prompt a lot of people into action. So it'll kick them into gear, and so we might see some of that kind of on a rolling basis as more and more Gen X kind of meet those moments. Another, I think, sticky emotional hook is keeping up with kids. So in interviews, we did a whole project around nutrition and fitness at midlife, and quite a few of the people who had kids, the kids are older, right? They're teenagers now, and frequently they're very active, and the parents can no longer keep up with them in the way that they could when they were younger. And so that prompted, at least qualitatively, some of these, particularly dads, to say, I got to lose this weight so that I can go play basketball with my son. Because now he's fun to play basketball with, but I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Which is at least that like gets at your feelings, right?
Well, it's funny, and that's actually that's a much easier problem to solve, right? Like that person is like sold on the benefits. The person sitting at home still watching too much TV and playing too many video games or whatever is the harder person to solve, because they're not. The first step is the hard one, right? Like once someone's like, "Hey, I really need to get better shape," that's actually pretty easy. Like, all right, let's talk about your options. But the first person that's more skeptical and doesn't admit yet that they need it to some degree. Is tricky. It's like this is going to become like a category expansion challenge for the kind of fitness and everything we're talking about today. We mostly couch terms fitness. The nutrition kind of wellness industry on the other side of the coin has the exact same problem, right?
Yes. Yep.
I guess the one difference might be that boomers are also more skeptical on that side. Where they embrace fitness more or wellness more. But it's an interesting question because that skepticism or that I always think of it as isolationism is not easy to penetrate, and it's not easy to change.
No. On the fitness side, there's a lot of personal training aimed at 40 and 50-year-olds because it makes sense until you talk about Gen X in this way. These people have stability, they have money, they need help. That's what personal training is good for. But that is just a complete mismatch with how Gen X thinks about both their approach to just life in general, because it's about do it myself. Why would I pay somebody to do this thing that I could figure it out? I just need a few hours on Google and I can figure out my own exercise
Yeah.
routine.
And it's also, I think that is too much. That's a much more uphill battle to fight. I think that the easier road here is clearly something that's group or systematized. Like it's something that's
it needs to be easy to enter, but
have a barrier to entry, but has like some social components hooked in that get you later. I mean, that is, I can see why pickleball really is built to solve a lot of different problems, isn't it? It's fascinating to watch. Like, it's funny. This is a total side note, but just quick for you: pickleball fad or here to stay?
Good question. I don't know. People really like it. I mean,
people love it to an irrational kind of like.
Yeah, I think that part is a fad. I think it will continue to stick around because it is fun and easy to play. But might see that the humps start to come down.
It is. Well, see, you know what's interesting about this? I find it kind of fascinating. Have you ever played it?
No, I haven't. I want to. It looks fun. Ping pong tennis.
I grew up in like a tennis household. Tennis was the sport, and I still like tennis. But the thing about tennis that's interesting is if you're I don't know what it is, like 80 feet away from each other, you can't really have a conversation. The thing that is hysterical about pickleball is you can just maintain a conversation through the whole game. It is like very social. Like you're still doing something, but it's much more like walking together or I don't know, cycling together where there's some exertion and there's some moments when you might stop the conversation, but you basically can have a conversation through the whole thing. You're only 15 feet apart. Everyone can hear each other fine. It is very interesting that it looks just like strong tennis, but you crossed a chasm there where all of a sudden the conversation could stick through the entire game, which fundamentally changes everything, right? Like it has now become social, which that's the thing that's, I think a lot of people talk about with golf. Like obviously golf, you have the reduced like athletic components that appeal to older people, but I think that there's like a big social component where you can have a conversation the whole time, basically, which really appeals to people. And that's, when you're younger and you're playing things like basketball or whatever, that's less of a goal, I think. But as you get older and fitness does have this social component, it's very compelling. That's the part that I originally thought it was a fad, but I like the more I look at that part, I'm like, no, this is becoming a lot of people's social group. Is this and it's fascinating to watch. It's everywhere around us, but it's at the same place where my kids' baseball practice is. So I've spent hours and hours watching these pickleball people now. You'll have groups that are like 20 or 30 people. And they're just constantly rotating, like who's got next kind of thing. And they have multiple courts going, and so there might be a moment for 15 minutes when you're out. But so if you join this group every Saturday morning, you have like a group of like 30 friends now. If you go every Saturday,
that's so fun.
It's really interesting to watch that. I'm like, wow, this might be the most social game I've ever seen.
It sounds, I mean, I love that observation. That's got to be why it's so much more fun than tennis, right? Aside from, tennis takes some skill to actually have a good game.
Tennis takes a lot more skill and a lot more athleticism. Tennis, and the older you get, like this is my problem. Like I was never that good at tennis, don't get me wrong, but the older I get, the more like if I play tennis, like my knee hurts for like 4 days afterwards. Like I pay a heavy cost for it. And if you don't play a lot, it's hard to be good at. Whereas pickleball, it's actually like it's pretty easy to like not to dog on it because there are people that are super good at it, but it's pretty like easy to be good enough,
It has all the fun of like a picnic game, right? You can play badminton and talk to each other the whole time. You can play volleyball at a picnic and talk to each other the whole time. And kind of the energy of that
too, which is interesting. Volleyball definitely has that.
I haven't gotten to play yet, but so we recently, part of this report coming out is we asked people how much they enjoy each of the activities that they do. And there's some very clear differences in the data around the types of things that people enjoy the most.
Okay, we're going to save that because that is a great topic for us to come back. After my vacation, I want to go through different sports with you and rank them by delight.
Well,
delightful sports versus drudgery. Delight
yes,
versus drudgery. You know?
they're very clear, delightful sports, and the ones golf is at the top. And it's sports that are social, but also could potentially combine with alcohol.
By the way, if I'm going to just guess off the top of my head, what is the most drudgy sport? To me, it's probably weightlifting, strength.
It's circuit training.
Yeah. Do you know that for my whole life, I have been trying to convince myself that I should be regular about strength training, and it's just such a fight for me. Like I just don't enjoy it. Which I don't feel the same way.
Me
Like
neither.
I'll jump on a Peloton and I'll sweat my buns off, but and I think it's fun to a certain degree. But man, having to do that 30 minutes of strength training is just. And by the way, I am like the ultimate example of Gen X, because if you pair that strength training with someone who's talking to me the whole time, aka personal fitness instructor, that is I love them as a group, don't get me wrong, but that is a special kind of pain to me. So I get the Gen X thing there.
My husband too. He will do that stuff by himself. He'll follow an app, and then every once in a while, I'll be like, maybe I should get a personal trainer, because I don't like to strength train either, but it would be good for me, and that would make me go. And I don't mind chatting with somebody for an hour while I lift weights. He's like, no, they are a scam. You are not allowed to go sign up with a personal trainer.
I don't think they're a scam. I just get tired.
I don't think they're a scam either, but he is really anti-personal trainer.
But it's funny. You know where I thought you were going with this. To me, I did it for a year. I think when I turned like 40 or something, I'm like, I'm going to get a personal trainer. I'm going to do this for a year, and I did it for a year, 2 days a week at like 6 a.m. Right, and the thing I learned was that the guy, honestly, by the third month, he was driving me crazy. He would to talk about he just talked so much, but the thing I realized is like I can't not show up to that appointment now that I've paid for it.
Right.
So I would go to the gym. That was like the benefit. I was like, if I cancel this guy, I'll just start hitting snooze, and I would go. And so I was like, that was the biggest benefit to doing it. I finished it for a year, but at the end of the year, he was really painful to me personally, which is terrible. I hope he's not listening to this podcast.
Well, it's just the Gen X in you coming out.
I'm so Gen X.
I do wonder if this is not necessarily a good solution for personal trainers themselves, but I think for Gen X, like to develop a plan with them, and then instead of like training sessions, to have accountability check-ins, basically. So here's the thing: you're going to do it yourself, but you have to check in occasionally, and that keeps you kind of on target.
Every once in a while, someone takes that thought and creates an app around it. I swear to God, last week, I just read that same app. And every time I see that, I'm like, we should have this at scale. There should be a little accountability group, goal group kind of thing. Because I think it's such a good idea. I think no one has been able to kind of get it at scale in the right way.
It's hard to make money because it's not, you're basically giving people a plan to do themselves.
When I was in grad school, we had a group. We met once a week, and you had to say your 3 goals for the coming week. And I think one of them was fitness, and one was like related to school, and one was like a personal thing or something. And basically, like, for every one you missed, I think you had to throw $5 in to the pool for dinner the next week. So we go to this super cheap Mexican place. It was a rad place down in San Diego, but the food was awesome, and we could get a margarita or whatever. And whoever didn't meet their goals for the previous week would largely fund the dinner. And it was funny because it would be like, this was Wednesday nights, I still remember. So it would be like Monday or Tuesday, and you're like, oh man, I got to get this done or I'm going to have to give 5. It would work. Like, you'd be like, I got to get this done, right? Like,
yeah.
It's pretty funny.
I had to do some physical therapy earlier this year, and it was the most I've ever done strength training exercises, because I had to go meet with my guy that I paid for once or twice a week. And if I didn't do it, I would be embarrassed. Also, I wouldn't heal. So.
there's that. But the short term, it was the embarrassment was more of a driver. We get
Yep,
it.
yep. I had to go in and
All
show
right,
him
so
I'd done the things.
we're gonna go off into our separate ways, and we're gonna solve the marketing problem that the fitness
Yeah,
industry has right now next,
for
and
Gen
then
X.
we're gonna uncorrelate alcohol from pure fitness delight somehow. We're gonna do some covariance on the back end, and we're gonna find out what is the most delightful activity once we subtract for alcohol. I like that.
Might
That's our
might be
to-do list. All right. Well,
that's next
thanks
time.
for educating me on these topics. It was really fun to talk to you.
Oh, thanks. It's always fun to chat with you.